Welcome to Awake to Oneness Radio. I am Caroline Chang, your host. The mission of Awake to Oneness Radio is to inspire the world to awaken to the universal truth of oneness. Science is now teaching us that all life is energy, and that energy is interconnected and interdependent. In essence, we're all one. Now, ancient wisdom and spirituality has been teaching the truth of oneness for eons. So science is just now catching up, but it's actually not new science. This science is almost 100 years old. So it's something that should be mainstream. Quantum physics, talking about the unified field theory and quantum entanglement, which all means basically we're all one, we're all connected. So what you do to another person, you're literally doing to another aspect of yourself. And when mankind awakens to the universal truth of oneness, there will be peace on earth. Today's show topic is Unity on the River with Rev Oguns Holder. I hope I did not mess up your name.
You did not. That was good.
Okay, great. Awesome. So welcome, Reverend Ogun. Please share. I discovered you on Facebook. I was just, I'm always on Facebook, YouTube, and there was a video you had posted that just really inspired me, and you were speaking about oneness, and so that's my passion, oneness. So I was like, I got to invite him on the show. So please share with our listeners your journey. You'd start as young as you want and go to where you are today.
How much time do you have? There's a lot in here.
It's my show. I'm the producer.
Okay, so it might, for the interest of time, it might be good to stick to the Cliff Notes version. But I'm originally from Barbados, and I was born and I grew up there till 1920. And I grew up in a very, I guess, traditional evangelical, charismatic environment. Speaking in tongues, laying on of hands, singing praise and worship songs for like an hour before the preacher even opened his mouth to talk, that kind of experience.
Okay.
And around 1920, I left to come to college in the United States. I attended a university, majored in music therapy. That was my first profession, actually.
Okay.
And while I was there, it was a Methodist college. I wasn't Methodist. It just happened to have the major I was interested in. And while I was there, I took on a lark an elective about the life of Jesus, because I was a good Christian boy. I was the one walking around campus at Easter time with pictures of the crucified Jesus on a T-shirt. I was that boy. Okay. And the life of Jesus class that I took talked about the New Testament books and the history behind them. And I learned about not just what was written in the Bible, I learned about how the Bible was written and who may have wrote it. I was shocked out of my gourd to find out that the Apostle Paul didn't write all those letters after all. And that Matthew didn't write Matthew, and Mark didn't write Mark, and all this stuff. And it blew my mind. I had a crisis of faith.
Right.
And left the church for a little while. Actually, couple of years later, I met someone who introduced me to Unity and Unity's teaching. That someone eventually became my wife, and that's always my running joke. When I walked into a Unity church, most people have this sense of, I've come home to my spiritual, identity. This is what I've always thought and believed. And my experience was, what strange cult have I walked into? This is some weird talk going on. And it kind of freaked me out a little bit. But I realized as I learned more about Unity's teachings, it started to close a lot of those religious loopholes that Christianity or traditional Christianity was never able to answer. Yes. And I studied more and more of these Unity teachings, and as I like to say, I transitioned from eventually being a user to become a pusher. So now I became a minister.
Okay.
And now I am spreading the message. I'm currently based in Amesbury, Massachusetts. It's about 45 minutes to an hour north of Boston.
Okay.
And I've been the senior minister there for going on 5 years. It's my 5th year
Okay.
that I've just started. And I'm not sure, I'm assuming, given who you are and your content, that users are familiar with Unity. But if
I
okay.
have actually attended Unity a few times. We don't have one very close to me,
Okay.
but about 45 minutes away is the closest one. And I have many, actually, years ago when I first awoke into the truth of oneness, that's when I did attend a few times.
Gotcha. I've learned to always ask, because usually when I say unity, for a lot of folks, sometimes it's only 2 or 3 minutes later in the conversation, I realize that they think I'm talking about Unitarian. And it's not quite the same thing, same ballpark, but not the same game. So
right.
I always take the time to, kind of spell it out a little bit. But
Yes.
anyone familiar with the message of oneness and consciousness, probably not a stranger to Unity's teachings.
Right. Yes. Me personally, it's interesting. I love how you were raised a good Christian boy and all of that. And then when you actually studied in school how the Bible was written, because I kind of went through that same transformation a little bit differently. I was raised not Catholic, but I was sent to Catholic school. My mom became Episcopalian. My mom actually converted from being a Baptist to Episcopalian, and my dad stayed Baptist. But we weren't a quote unquote very religious household. My parents sent me and my brother to Catholic school for a better education. And I know that Episcopalian is very close to Catholicism. Yeah. But it was when I was young, honestly, what I was being taught did not resonate with me. And I could not say that at 4 and 5 and 6 years old. And I was raised, child is to be seen, not heard. Oh, yeah. So even though I had everything, not everything, but a lot of things that were coming at me from religious class just didn't resonate, didn't make sense. I couldn't question them, Yeah. So I had
the idea of children being seen and not heard, that's more of a Black culture thing. I come from the Caribbean, and that was my experience as well.
Yes.
So much of my family are shocked that I'm a person who gets up in front of hundreds of people every Sunday and speak for a living. They were like, "You were so quiet as a child." I was like, "Y'all didn't let me speak."
Exactly. And that's why, that's why I have a radio show. I couldn't.
There you go. Exactly. And why I've been podcasting for maybe going on 10 years now.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So when you're a child and you're not allowed to speak, once you're an adult, you get a chance to speak. But what I did as I grew up, I knew what I was being taught wasn't resonating. So I went on a search starting from when I was in my teens for truth. And then I ran across the same information you ran across about the Bible and who wrote the Bible and the many different authors and the different languages and the translations. And I think I heard there's over 100 versions of the Bible in English alone. So I think there's really great pearls of wisdom in the Bible.
Yep.
But I think it's just that you have to kind of read it with your own heart and dive into it with your own heart and not all that you've been kind of force-fed.
Right.
Yeah.
And I always now take the chance to always emphasize that I am not disparaging traditional or evangelical Christianity, in any way as a teaching.
Yeah.
For me, I have come to a place where I can I'm comfortable with saying anything that brings an individual closer to an understanding of themselves and God, I'm all for. I may not have to agree with all of them or choose to practice all of them, but if it resonates and works for you, then so be it. I support that. And I've also become comfortable with using the word Christian to identify myself again. Mm-hmm. There was a period of time I didn't want anything to do with that word because of what it represented, the religious context, even the political context. But now I'm comfortable with using that word because I'm comfortable with saying there are many faces and aspects of Christianity in its purest sense. Christianity is is for me to be a Christian is to live my life based on the life and teachings of Jesus. And you know, they're open to varied interpretations how that looks. And part of, I think, my mission is to help reclaim that word from a lot of the cultural and political associations that are being made with it.
I identify with you greatly. I have total respect for anybody's belief, anybody, because I am grounded in oneness. So no matter what a person believes, they're still part of God. They're still part of the oneness. I don't take on any labels, quote unquote labels. So I don't call myself Christian because my belief is unconditional love, unconditional forgiveness, because no matter who you are, you're a part of me. And you will never be separated from me, and you will never be separated from what we call God. My definition for God is all that is. There is nothing outside of God. God is everything. And everybody is a part of God and is a holographic a part of God, meaning all of God is in each of us. I love Rumi's quote. You're not a drop in the ocean. You are the ocean in a drop. So we're not just a piece of God. We are all of God in a drop. So when I started to understand the holographic aspect of oneness and who we are, I dropped all the labels. So I was very, very active in a Christian church for many years. But I kind of left the church. There was a lot going on in the church, but I left the church. And even I did visit Unity. But for me personally, I just don't need that structure of a church to practice, because I'm focused and grounded in oneness. And I chuckle because a friend of mine recently invited me to her church. See, I have Christians that are always trying to save me now.
you and me both. My family still prays for me every night.
Oh yes, I have Christians. I have a dear friend. She's a dear friend, and she just had to get me into church. So I went to church. But actually, before I went to the service, I had met her pastor, and we got into a little discussion. They're always friendly because I never debate or argue what your beliefs are. I just share my beliefs and what resonates with you. Like you were saying, on this show, I always tell my audience, whatever resonates is true in your heart and in your soul. Just that's where I want you to go for your answers, is internal, and then shine your light to the world. So, but I met the pastor before I went to the service, and he wanted to get into, because I always give out my card, Wake to Oneness, and so people get, what is this oneness? And I'm like, well, it's not a religion, and then I just go into it. We're all connected. You know, for me, it's just all unconditional love. That's all it is. So we get into, so he actually, this minister actually wrote a sermon against what I believe in, everything.
Wow.
And that's why he invited me. They wanted me to be there. So after the service, I just smiled and I said, well, you know what? In your message, there was a lot of contradiction, but it's all good, and walked away. I will not argue. I will not debate. Whatever resonates for you as true, live your truth. I'm just sharing mine. Yes.
Yeah. Recently, I posted a thing on the Apostles' Creed. Remember a while back at George Herbert Walker Bush's funeral.
Okay.
Senior. All the presidents were there, living presidents. Trump, Obama, Clinton was there as well, Jimmy Carter, and there was a lot of fuss made after about. When they were reading the Apostles' Creed, the president wasn't reading it, our current President Trump. And I apparently poked the bear when I said, you know what, my issues with Trump are about as long as, CVS receipts that we get. I got a lot of issues with the president.
Okay.
But this one isn't going to be one of them, because I'm a person who also is very firmly believes that I shouldn't be saying and affirming things that don't resonate with who I am. Now, I don't for one second believe that's the case he was making. You know, our president and religion are like, you know, this far apart. Don't let me get started there. But I said there are certain aspects of the Apostles' Creed that I no longer resonate with or don't resonate with now. So I kind of wrote a version of it that is who I am and who resonates with me. And the person that was probably the most vehemently opposed to that and argued with me the most was a Methodist minister who was a college friend of mine, actually. And I think part of what many people forget is that these ideas that seem to be new around, you know, oneness belief thinking and new thought thinking, things like, you know, original blessing versus original sin, things like, you know, not necessarily believing in a Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. These were ideas in Christian theology that existed from the beginning, along with theories like original sin and stuff like that. There have always been complementary voices to the traditional Christian story. So if I want to align myself with them, it's really okay too.
Right.
But there was a huge argument about this. And throughout the whole argument, he just kept saying, it's okay that you believe what you believe. What I believe is okay too.
Exactly.
You know, we don't have to try and convince one another that the other is wrong. And my daughter, my daughter who's 18, and she is so wise. She said, at this point, I realize you're not trying to convince him what to believe, but I think you're just trying to convince him to realize that he's wrong for trying to convince you. She was like, and I had to hear that. I literally had to hear that. And go, you are right. And, exactly. And walk away from the conversation.
Exactly.
You know, I was still trying to get the win.
Yes. Oh, believe me. And it seems like they're always in my path. What I call fundamental Christian, they're always in my path, which is, and I have loving, and I love that I can have a loving conversation with someone that we have totally different beliefs, but we can, it's always, we're ending with a smile. They're always, you know, we can end with a hug. It's all about unity within diversity.
Yes.
That's what it's all about. We are unique divine aspects of God. That is who we are. We each are. It doesn't matter. Even if a person is a KKK or a Satanist, whatever, that person is still a divine aspect of God. Okay, with their own journey, with their own belief. And it's not right or wrong. It's not about trying to make someone believe what you believe, because when you really are grounded in your truth, you allow the other to be grounded in whatever truth so you can agree to disagree with your friend from college. We just, okay, I hear you. Because a lot of times people will say to me that they don't think, if I don't agree with them, they don't think I understand them, which is not the case at all. I understand them totally. I just don't agree. And I've had to say that many times. It's like, I understand you completely, and I give you that, but it's just something I don't agree with. So that is the key to world peace right there, because we have all these different religions. And we have to tear down the division. To me, it's all. Now, I know you were talking about the president's funeral, and I did. In the gym, I caught a few glimpses of that service. I stopped watching mainstream news in 2001, 2 weeks after 9/11, and it was internal. I don't hear anything external audibly, but internally, I was always one to follow my what resonated from within. What resonated with me from within 2 weeks after 9/11 was turn off that news and don't ever turn it back on again. And I didn't know why. I even said it aloud. Why? I don't get it. But I did. I was obedient to what that voice, internal voice, telling me to turn it off. And I didn't realize till years later, maybe 10 or 11 years later, why. It's because of everything is vibration.
It is.
And that news is constantly, the mainstream news is constantly feeding you this negative vibration to lower your vibration. So that's how we are so powerful, but we give over our power when we're in a state of fear. And the mainstream news keeps the masses in a state of fear. So I know what's going on in the news. I knew the president passed away and all of that. And as far as President Trump, I don't think I've ever heard him speak. And when I first heard he was running, I mean, before he was elected, I thought it was a joke. Actually, I'm like, huh?
So did all of us.
But wait a second. When he got elected, for me, the joke just got funnier. It didn't concern me. It doesn't concern me who's in the White House, because I know my power. I know that the man in the White House is no more powerful than I am. Our power comes from, it's eternal, it's internal and eternal. And it's from spirit. It's from our connection to all that is, to God. So doesn't matter who's in that White House. I thought it was the funniest thing when he got elected. I really did. A lot of I had relatives that were up in arms, but I was like, chill out. He only has the power over you that you give to him. You give away your power that way.
So I will say I do watch the news. I'm an avid news watcher. As somebody said a while ago, how else will you know what to pray for if you don't watch the news? So the news is my prayer list. And the other thing I'll say in terms of you're absolutely correct. There's nothing we can hear from the outside that takes away our internal power. Jesus said it best. He said, "It's not what comes in a man or person that defiles them. It's what comes out of them." Mm-hmm. So what you, in many aspects, what you take in externally, yes, everything is vibration, but it affects you as much as you allow it to.
Exactly.
So you can watch the news and you cannot get sucked down with the negativity. The other thing that for me is important to stay on top of news-wise is, so I'm the minister of a church.
Yeah.
And there are many members in my church, as is often the case in Unity and New Thought churches, and more mainstream churches these days, who are members of the LGBTQIA community.
Yes.
And they were legitimately concerned about their civil rights being reversed and taken away because of the rhetoric of this president. And many of my talks have been around, and a little bit to your point, not allowing the fear of that to dictate how we show up in the world, you know, but also realize that we do have, in many ways, a moral and spiritual obligation to be a voice for the oneness that we want to speak about. So whether that looks like, you go do a march, whether that looks like you just call your congressman, whether it looks like you just write a letter, an email, whether it looks like you give a donation to the ACLU or an organization that is being the legal front of these challenges, that we participate in the process. And again, for me, I always come back to the life of Jesus. And Jesus, many people, tend to overlook this, was a revolutionary. This is why he was crucified. I don't believe the crucifixion was a divinely ordained thing to save our souls. No, he was crucified because he was a rebel. And he upended the status quo of things. He reminded people that it is what is within us that should be what leads us, and not the power structures that were in place. And he upset enough people in power that they put him to death. So for me, I the phrase that I coined with my congregants, some of who also push back, because it's, you're in church, you can't talk politics in church, you can't talk about these issues. And I said, if we are supposed to be the change agents, we have to have discussions about these things. Someone would say to me, I come to church to escape all that. And I said, well, then you picked the wrong place, because I'm not here providing an escape. I am here, I believe my calling is to help spiritually empower you to go into the world and be a voice for oneness, be a voice for love is all there is, be a voice for anyone, regardless of their ethnicity, their ability, their identification, their gender, their age, their financial status. Each and every one of them is the embodiment of God. And therefore, if some of them are being taken advantage of or being disenfranchised, that's not oneness.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's about bringing that spiritual concept of oneness into the visible material world.
Yes.
And that's what Jesus did. You know,
Mm-hmm.
all these teachings and Judaic traditions. He said, you know, what's the point of knowing and reciting these things if you don't show compassion to the person? You know, one of his greatest stories, the Good Samaritan, was all about,
Right.
you know, it doesn't matter how much spiritual knowledge you have or spiritual, you know, or power that you have, if you don't live compassionately to your brother, who is anyone else besides you,
Exactly.
then you're missing the point
Exactly.
of it all. So that's kind of where I think I've been coming from more and more, and it's, you know, it resonates well with some people and some people not so much. But to your point, I got to do me.
Yes, exactly. And I tell people all the time, I think one of the greatest things I did is stop watching the news, and I stopped watching commercial television in 2011. But for me, but I don't say that for everybody. And
Right.
for me, because I still know what's going on in the news. I mean, first of all, I'm on the computer all the time. Every time I turn on the computer, the headlines are popping up.
Yes,
So
yes.
if a headline pops up that's interesting, I'm like, oh, let me click on that, read more about it. I can. So you don't have to watch mainstream news. I just know what it was. My spirit told me to stop watching it because of what it was doing to my.
Absolutely. And I agree with you 100%. You got to take breaks from it. You can't, and you know, I remember the night after the president was elected, many of my congregants, they're like, we need to have a service. We're all upset and stuff. And I already said to people, listen, you got to pace yourselves, because everyone was saying he's going to be, you know, arrested and impeached and taken out of office. And I said, okay, well, you know, none of that might happen. And if he's our president for the 4 years, what are you going to do in that 4 years?
Yeah, never know. He might even be president for 8 years.
He might be president for 8. And I said, listen, you know how we call it spiritual practice?
Yeah.
What are we practicing for? Times like these.
Yes.
You know, so double down on your spiritual practices. Do more meditation. Do more yoga. Do more whatever it is that feeds your spirit.
Exactly.
So that then you can be that presence of oneness in the world, or even more difficult, be that presence of oneness at Thanksgiving family dinner when everybody else in your family is, you know,
right,
minds over these issues.
Yes. Well, also, because one of the things I had to say when he got elected, I wrote in Bernie. That's who I voted for. It's like, I wrote in, he's like, Bernie, that's the guy I want. But the day after, when I found out, because I don't watch the news, so I didn't even know. I was a student. I teach piano lessons. You were saying you studied music too.
Yes.
Music was my minor in school, and I teach piano lessons. And I have a 7-year-old student that came that day, my first student, and he was like, I'm like, what's wrong? I didn't even know. I didn't know who had won the election at that time. I sensed it was Trump, but I didn't know for sure. And he comes in all pouty face, and I was like, what's the matter? 7 years old. It's like, what's the matter? He's like, Donald Trump won in the election. I'm like, and I'm so sad. I'm like, you don't have to be sad. It's okay, you know. But that's how I found out. But also, I say that, and I said it that day, we have to remember, when we're grounded in the truth of oneness, Donald Trump is not outside of the oneness.
No, absolutely not. He is. And this was a blog post I wrote like the summer he was elected. I called him the face of chemicalization. And in unity teachings, we have a thing called chemicalization, which is when we lay hold of a new teaching, a new transformative teaching, there's a piece of us that doesn't want to give up the old thing that wasn't working as well. the old limiting belief about ourselves. We don't want to give that up because there's a certain comfort in that, and our ego wants to stay stuck in its egoicness. So chemicalization is that discomfort that we have when we begin to embrace the new teachings and struggle with letting go of the old ones.
Yeah.
And I said, and when I realized he'd gotten the Republican nomination, I said to people, he is going to be elected. And they told me I lost my mind. I said, no, we in the consciousness of this country, the mass consciousness, we are at a point where we're beginning to say yes to oneness. We're beginning to say yes to equality. This is why, we have when same-sex marriage was passed, we're now having more and more equal rights for minorities. We're more and more leveling the playing field between men and women. So we are beginning to actualize this, and the old system that says no to that is struggling. We're in that transformative section, and he is the face of that. He's the face of the old system that's saying we don't want to change.
Okay.
But the new consciousness of oneness is saying you don't have a choice but to change.
Right.
Our consciousness is always evolving upward.
Exactly.
And the lower levels are going to struggle against it, but they eventually going to be brought upward. We don't have a choice in this, and that's what I say to people.
Right.
Look at us as a human race over the thousands of years we've existed.
Yes.
This is the best we've ever been, and we've always been getting better.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you just look at the figures, how many people are in poverty now than 500 years ago?
Right.
500 years ago, slavery was the understood transactions of the world.
Yes.
Women were property. I mean, it was.
Yes.
In just the last 100 years, the phenomenal changes we've made. This is a reflection of a consciousness that says we need to lift ourselves up.
Yes.
And people who benefited from the old systems and powers, of course, they're going to want to resist that. Yes. But again, when we look in history, they've always ended up on the losing end.
Mm-hmm.
So the evolution of consciousness, if you're familiar with spiral dynamics, the upward evolution of consciousness,
yes,
it's happening. There's nothing we can do to stop it, slow it down. The best we can do is get on board and take the ride up with it,
yes.
and evolve. And so big picture, you're right. Absolutely nothing to worry about.
Yes.
And at the same time, just again, as Jesus did with the people standing right in front of him, we be that voice for healing. We be that voice for the disenfranchised. We be that voice for those who have been oppressed and subjugated by the powers.
Right.
The old Christian term, powers and principalities. Yeah, that not in terms of demons but power structures and systems. Things like racism. Things in our system that keep certain groups oppressed.
Yes.
Those of us who've made a realization that's in essence, quote unquote, a false teaching, we can be a voice for that. And we first be a voice for it by demonstrating it in our own lives.
Exactly.
When we can put these teachings into practice, into reality, and our lives become transformed, and the things that are happening around us have absolutely no impact on us, then we can extend that to other people as well. So I like to say to my folk, be outraged, as in realize that there are injustices in this world that do not reflect oneness, and be a voice for the oneness, but don't become enraged. Don't let the anger consume you.
Exactly.
And live from that place.
Exactly, because it is truly vibration. So like you say, your actions, you want them to come from a high vibration, not, because everything is vibration. And when I discovered that he was elected, something inside of me was saying, this is exactly what we need.
Oh, absolutely.
I know nothing about his politics. I'm not political at all, but it's the shakeup.
Yeah, this whole country is doing the shadow work right now.
Yes, Yes.
And what he has come to do is move the furniture so we can see all the stuff that was hidden in the shadows before.
Exactly.
And we were like, oh my God, how did that get there? Well, we're the only people living in the house. We put it there.
Yeah.
So it's all this gunk is accumulated in the dark corners of our country's consciousness.
Yeah.
And he's moved the furniture around, exposed it.
Yeah.
So that was been there. And some of us who are minorities, we're not surprised by any of it. We've been seeing it our whole lives.
Right.
But he's exposed it to the masses. And now we are at that choice point where we got to say, is that who we want to be? Or is it not who we want to be?
Right.
And he's been the face of that. So, in that sense, in all things give thanks. We got to give thanks for him as being president to allow this to come to light so that then we can heal and transform it.
Exactly.
You can't heal and transform what you don't want to admit's there.
You can't, exactly. You can't push it. You can't push that shadow side aside. You can't, the more you push it aside, the stronger it's going to come back.
Yeah.
So like you said, to transform it, you have to shine a light on it.
Absolutely.
And that exactly, so when he was elected president, I felt joyful because not that I voted for him or wanted him to win, but I knew it was happening for our highest good.
Yes.
I knew it was happening for a good person.
And the challenge of spiritual practice is to remember that and live that in the midst of all turmoil and what's going on. I mean, again, I go back to the examples of Jesus walking on water in the midst of the storm. No, not that one. When he's asleep in the boat, and the storm's raging around him. And many people say, the miracle is when he got up and said, "Peace, be still," and he controlled the weather. And I said, no, the miracle was the fact that he was asleep in the boat. Yeah. That all this stuff, he was at peace. All this stuff is happening around him. It's a boat. It's going up and down.
Yes,
the slightest wave, and I'm getting seasick.
Yeah.
But he was asleep. He was so centered in who he was as a divine being that none of the circumstances bothered him. Even when he woke up, it was like, this is nothing.
Okay. Yeah, he's like, be still for them. It wasn't bothering me, but be still for them.
Exactly. So that's, for me, that's the first miracle piece in that story.
Yeah.
And that's our miracle as well, to be in that place where we are so centered in the truth of who we are as powerful divine beings that we're in the midst of the storm and we don't even see that there's a storm going on. Exactly. And then we are divinely guided to do what's ours to do. Because again, he could have woken up and seen the storm and just went on right back to sleep.
Yeah, because it wasn't bothering him. That actually, when I awoke into the truth, universal truth of oneness, which was in 2007, and it was a science, it was quantum physics that really, I was studying spirituality off and on, metaphysics, spirituality off and on for 30 years. But there was a missing piece for me, and the missing piece was oneness. And I really understood oneness from a quantum physics documentary called "What the Bleep Do We Know?" I love that. Yes, that's woke me up. Lynn McTaggart, one sentence. She said, "The biggest problem in the world today is the illusion of separateness." And something woke up inside of me when she said it. I'm like, I get it. And so when I understood oneness, though, when you're talking about the Jesus in peace, I would hear in church the saying, peace to be, now why did I forget it? It's peace, the saying I'm trying to say, it's a verse, a Bible verse, to be peaceful, surpassing all understanding. Oh, that's it. That's what I'm trying to say. I would hear that all the time when I was in church, and I couldn't get it. But when I understood oneness, I understood the peace that surpasses all understanding. That's it. That's the only time I got it. Did not get it when I was going to church every Sunday. But when I understood oneness, I got it. Yes. So even though when he was elected, and a lot of my friends and a lot of my relatives were just like your congregation was all up in arms, I was at peace. Because I was like, okay, this is happening for a good reason. Everything happens for our highest good, whether we're aware of it from the human perspective. But if we know that we are all divine aspects of God and all connected to God, everything that happens does happen for our highest good. And we can look at, we can take two ways. We can look at it as horrible, or we can look for the good. Like, count it all joy.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, the peace that surpasses all understanding. That's when I got it, when I understood oneness. And then I wanted to share it with the world in 2007. And I was like, but no, you know, people would look at me like I have two heads. What are you talking about? And it used to, when I first, you know, understood it for me, and I couldn't get other people to understand it, it would upset me. But then I had to realize, okay, I have to let that go. I have to let each person evolve on their path.
Yeah.
You know, all I can do is be an example of the oneness, live it, share it. That's I was inspired to launch this podcast. I didn't even know what a podcast was. When I was thought in my mind, internet radio. Podcast, what is that? You know, so 4 years ago, but it's just
well, know. I too love podcasts, and I'm currently in my third or fourth podcast. I've lost track of them. My late wife, she's deceased. We did a spiritual parenting podcast.
Okay.
And then I also did one with some classmates of mine when I was in seminary.
Okay.
I did a third one after that. It was more like interview, special guest format, and right now the one I'm doing is called Pub Theology.
Okay.
And it's based on the premise of the pub, the bar, the restaurant as the gathering place where people, you know, and there are live groups around the country that do this. If people are interested, if you go to pubtheology.com, you'll see a map where you can go find a group somewhere or start your own. But the podcast is kind of that built on that premise. People for, you know, eons have been gathering in pubs to talk about issues and stuff. And, you know, there's that saying, in vino veritas, as in, you know, when you drink a little, it lowers your inhibitions and you tell the truth. But the point is not about the drinking. We have gatherings and people are drinking water. It's not about the drink. It's about coming together from all different sorts of backgrounds and teachings and theologies and belief systems to find what do we share in common? What can we be in dialogue about? So I love doing that. I do it with, and it's an interfaith sort of approach as well. I do it myself as a Unity minister. My co-hosts are UCC, United Church of Christ, and Presbyterian.
Okay.
So it always makes for fun dialogue to have these different perspectives coming in. So check it out. Pubtheology.com is where you'll find everything, and wherever you find podcasts, it's called Pub Theology Live.
Okay.
Look that up and hear some fun dialogues.
Oh, that sounds great. I love it. I love too when like I said, I think the universe is putting in front of me fundamental Christians all the time, which is great because I get into really wonderful conversations with them in the sense that I was brought up, I went to Catholic school, went to religion class every day while I was growing up. I was very active in actually, I thought it was a non-denominational church when I first joined it, but then I found out it was Assemblies of God. I never had heard of Assemblies of God, but when I first joined it, I thought it was non-denominational. But I was very active in the Assemblies of God church here, I live in the Poconos. We're getting a lot of snow right now. I don't know if you guys are getting.
We got some last night, but for us, it's more of a cold snap. It's getting really cold, and we had a lot of our snow a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. We get like anywhere from like 2 to 3 feet at a time sometimes.
Wow.
And we're getting that same cold snap because of the elevation. We're high up in the mountains. So even though you're north of me, I think our weather, we might get colder and more snow than you guys.
You probably do. But you know what? Tomorrow I'm hopping on a plane. I'm going to Barbados, so I will be 80 degrees on a beach and cold no more for at least 3 weeks.
Oh, okay. And I have been to Barbados on a cruise. So
wonderful.
Yeah, I have been to Barbados a couple of times on cruises. So I haven't really spent time, like, you know, only get to spend the day, but I've gone jet skiing. I'm a big jet skier. I love it. The first time I went jet skiing was in Barbados.
I think one of the most underrated, and unappreciated things that Jesus modeled for us is self-care. Because how many times did he, you know, he went off to the desert to by himself. As I like to say, if you read the scriptures carefully, often when he would say something controversial and it will get everybody up in arms, and sometimes it would turn into physical struggles, and suddenly he disappeared from their midst. He was gone.
Yeah.
So he always took the time to withdraw as well. And, you know, in these times especially, we have to take care of ourselves. We have to take the time to replenish.
Right. Well, I would, like I said, I think I told you before we started recording, I'll be going to Boston for the very first time in 3 weeks.
Yes.
But I would definitely, if you were going to be there, I would definitely make my way to Unity.
Well, let's see. What date exactly are you talking? Because 3 weeks.
I'm talking about February 22nd. That
okay.
week.
So you're in luck, because the 24th I will be back. Now, I won't be the speaker at the church on that day, but I will be there.
Okay.
Part of it is it's not a true vacation if I have to spend the last 3 days of it putting a talk together.
Okay.
That means I've come back to work 3 days earlier than I planned. So I usually structure it so that there's a guest speaker the Sunday after I come back from vacation.
I
so
hear you.
have a true vacation.
Yes.
As well. But if you are around and want to make the trek up to Amesbury, you know,
I definitely would like to do that. I like that. Yeah, because I'll be there from Friday to Monday. So I'll be there that whole Sunday.
Well, come on up.
All right. Okay. I'll be knocking on the door. Let me in. So, but tell us more. I think we got so into, tell us more about your journey, because I think we got up to the point where you first stepped into a Unity church. Yeah. And then you met your wife.
Yes. So one of the interesting pieces of my story is the call to ministry. Is, you know, many ministers and pastors, they remember mostly with affection the day they realized that, you know, church ministry was theirs to do. You know, when I made that realization, I was initially not happy about it. You know, I growing up in the church, I'd witnessed many ministers and preachers just exhausted, burnt out, no time for their families, that kind of stuff, and that was not the life I wanted to live. But but my wife was also a minister, and interesting enough, when I saw her experience when she was in seminary, she went before me. Again, it made me say, I do not want to do this. Okay. And in true Jonah and the whale form, I ran from it until I found myself in the situation. I won't go into details, but it almost cost me my life. Okay. And I realized that I had to stop running for this. I came to it actually. I don't know if you're familiar with The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. No. So it's a great book and process. The Artist's Way. The author is Julia Cameron. Okay. And one of the techniques that she talks about is doing an activity called morning pages, where, you know, the first thing you do when you get up is just go get your legal pad and write a minimum of 3 pages. Like, and you don't think about it. It is stream of consciousness. She goes, even if you think there's nothing to write, you write down, I got nothing to write today. This is stupid. I don't know why I'm doing this. You just do that. And I like to call it like intensive journaling. Okay. You know, but doing the Artist's Way and all the activities and the processes that is involved with that really got me to a place of clarity, of getting in touch with all the fears I had around being a minister.
Okay.
And once again, like we said before, once you can shine a light on it, then you
Yes.
can heal it, you can transform it. And eventually it got to the place where I was ready to embrace it.
Yeah.
I went to seminary. This is Unity has its own school and campus in outside of Kansas City.
Right.
So I was there, and it was again there that I had my second crisis of faith.
Okay.
Because I went in with this idea of Unity's teachings are it. These are the teachings. Everybody else, they're just floundering around, but Unity is it.
Yes.
It was a very immature, naive proposition that I was going in with. And then somewhere around there, not only did I realize that Unity was not it, that there is no it.
Right.
Like Unity is, it's just one spoke on the wheel, if you will. If you're familiar with the Tao, it speaks of the Tao as a wheel and all these spokes. We're just one spoke.
Yes.
Yeah, on the wheel. Could I be okay with that? But then there was also the coming, I like to call it the coming home to myself, the realization that here I was in my mid 30s and I really had no idea who I was.
Okay.
And part of that, I can thank the Enneagram. I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram as well. So the Enneagram is a kind of a personality spectrum. So, people think of the Myers-Briggs and all that. The Enneagram is a much more holistic spiritual picture of your personality style.
Okay.
It evolved out of the work of the Sufi mystic Gurdjieff, and it's there are many different approaches to it, but it was the one tool that allowed me to begin to figure out who I was, not just the divine being. I was kind of, realizing that, but the personality shell on top of my divine being, who was that? And when I began to realize I didn't know who that was, it caused me to question every decision I made in my life. And it was just so overwhelming. I went off the deep end. It was like another crisis of faith and of self. I always say to people, if you don't have at least 2 good crises of faith and self, you're not doing it right. That is a joke. Please don't take me seriously. If you don't have any and you're happy, good on you. But that happened in seminary as well. And, it was tortuous for me and my family at the time, but in hindsight, it was the best thing that ever happened. It was my God self making itself known to me.
Right.
And me being willing to say, yes, let me do that. So I stepped into that. I graduated. And then for about a year and a half, 2 years, I went on what I like to call my rock star preacher tour. So I started guest speaking at churches, across the country.
Right.
I mean, I had a blast. You roll in, you give a talk, you sometimes push a few buttons, upset people, get all in uproar, and then like Jesus, you just vanish, you go, you're done. So it was a lot of fun. I wrote a book in that time. The book is called Rants to Revelations. Unabashedly honest reflections on, I should know this. I wrote the book. There's a copy on my shelf there. I could barely reach it. Anyway, but the main title is Rants to Revelations. And you can, buy it on Amazon.
Okay.
So I wrote that book, which was, again, for me, a fairly, what's the word I want? It was a process. I like to call myself an ideas guy. I'm looking up the title now because now it's bugging me.
Okay, gotcha. No problem.
I should know the title of my own book, right?
That's okay. I'm working on my first book, and when you said you had 2 crises of faith, I always share with my listeners. I've had many crises, but I share with my listeners. Those are our biggest blessings.
Oh, absolutely.
Those are our greatest blessings.
They're not our breakdowns. They're breakthroughs.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So the book is Rants to Revelations, unabashedly honest reflections on life, spirituality, and the meaning of God. So there are a series of different essays, and it like I said, you can still buy it.
Yeah.
And then around, I'd say 2013, going into 14, was when I started to realize, as much as I love doing the preacher tour thing, I still wasn't feeling quite fulfilled. And I realized part of that was I was missing spiritual community. It was all coming full circle. I grew up in a church,
Yes.
And the people of the church were my friends. They were my family. They were the people I turned to. That was my support system.
Yeah.
And I realized I was missing that. My wife was a church minister at the time. So I had a lot of connections with the people there, and I was beginning to realize this is what I was missing. So I became their associate minister, a part-time associate, and this is in Gaithersburg, Maryland, in the DC area.
Okay.
And so my wife was the senior minister. I was the associate minister. So there were a lot of dynamics there that kind of didn't work well. We had different ideas about how a minister was to show up to the world and to the congregation. Right. So we realized that if we were gonna save our marriage, I needed to go find another church to be one. Right, one of them was gonna go.
Right.
So that was when I applied to become the minister of where I am now, Unity on the River.
Okay.
And I started that in January of 2015, and just the week after I started, my wife was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. Oh. And it was probably, again, the traditional idea would have been, of course, I get out this job and be home with my family, because at this point I'm flying back and forth between DC and the Boston area. Okay. Few days up here, rest of the week home. Okay. And this day and age, that's not an unusual thing. Many families do that. May not be their preferred way to get stuff done, but that's what happens. And so again, it was one of those things where by now I had learned how to listen to the intuitive voice, how to listen to the God whispers, if you will. Yes. And I got clear that I needed to stay in that job, to stay at that community. So that was a fascinating first year for all of us. Okay. She passed away in June that year. So for the first 6 months, I'm flying back and forth. She's struggling with the disease. She continues to be one of the bravest people I've ever known, because she was clear, I'm not injecting poisons in my body. I'm not doing chemotherapy. This is my path. Oh, goodness. I had a lot of anger. I applaud her. Yeah, I had a lot of anger around that. I mean,
yeah, I'm completely holistic. I was Western medicine at all.
Lots of therapy after the fact around my human anger issues, because there was no part of me that disagreed with her choices. Right. I understood I understood that. Yeah. We had discussions about this. Neither of us were afraid of death. It was Yes. But here I was losing my wife. Yes. Or daughter, who's 14, 15 at the time, is about to lose her mother. Yeah. So there's a lot of anger around that. But here we are, 4 years later. In terms of ministry, it was absolutely the right choice for me to stay. Yeah. My daughter is just this beautiful, strong, amazing young woman who's following her passion to be a dancer. She's actually right now in the midst of applying for colleges to go study and do auditions and stuff. And
wow, awesome.
And we walked through this grief process, and a lot of what I talk about now in relation to grief is to embrace that grief itself is a spiritual practice. Many times when we are in grief, we want to use our spiritual practices to try and get through the grief process, or to try to mitigate the feelings that come up from grief. And for a lot of us, they don't work. I remember struggling with sitting still to meditate when, the months after she passed away and stuff. But then I began to realize, the grief itself is the process. Grief is healing, and healing is I like to say to people, we got to make the distinction between being cured, being healed, and being whole. Those are 3 different things. Okay. Yeah. For me, being cured is when we eradicate the disease from our body. Okay. And sometimes that'll happen, and sometimes that won't. Right. And it's okay either way, because no one's everybody's going to die. So
I hear. Yeah, I don't use the word death a lot in the sense that I understand what you're saying.
I mean, the physical body at some point is going to stop functioning.
The physical body is going to go back to where it came, which is
exactly.
Ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
It's not a matter if, it's just a matter when and how.
Exactly. I agree. Exactly.
Right. So, and a lot of us want to be cured to avoid that. We have a fear of death, or we're so attached to our life that, or body, physical life that we don't want to lose that. Mm-hmm. We create a lot of meaning about what it means to die at this age or that age, or, I haven't done this yet. Well, what's stopping you? Go do it now. So that's curing. For me, healing, true healing, is when you come to a place of peace with what is. When you come to peace with what is,
it's so true. What
you're healed.
Yes.
There's no struggle within you. You've embraced what is. And now wholeness is the next step. Wholeness is when, in the midst of all of that, in the midst of being at peace with what is, you continue to be whatever the divine embodiment is asking you to be. So, and I just spoke about this past Sunday, and I used the example of Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking was, one of our most brilliant minds.
Yes.
And he was paralyzed from ALS.
Yes.
And it continued to degrade over the years till he finally expired. But that never stopped him from stepping into the wholeness of who he was as a brilliant mind.
Exactly.
I used the example of Evelyn Glennie, who is one of the most preeminent percussionists in this world. Solo percussionist. She's played with orchestras around the world. She is one of the most amazing musicians I've ever experienced. She's been deaf since she was 12 years old.
Okay. Yes.
Right.
Wow.
So here we have two individuals who were not cured.
Yes.
Yes. They clearly made peace with what is. Yes. And then they went on to be the fullness of the divine potential that they were. Exactly. Okay. So those are distinctions that I make. And for me, grief is a process of healing towards wholeness. Mm-hmm. Making peace with what is, so that you can again now be this whole expression of God, of the oneness, of the love, whatever name you want to use. So that's what I've really been talking about lately. Folks have interviewed me about it. Mm-hmm. I'm in the process of writing about it. And hopefully, the more I say it out loud, the more likely it'll probably happen. I would like to think that with, by this time next year, my book about it is on the shelves. So that's the timeline I'm giving myself. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm up to. If folks are interested in seeing my talks,
yes,
unityontheriver.org, the website, you can go there. If you want to live stream me on Sunday, there's a live stream page there. On YouTube, Unity on the River, we've got a channel on there. You can see the service and podcasts of the talk. So just the sermon that I give on Sunday. Yes. You can find that on it's SoundCloud and also on Spotify, where you stream music from. You can find them on there. Working to get them on other platforms pretty soon. So, you can hear my stuff all over.
Wow. Yeah, I love it. I love it. And you touched on grief, which is a big part of my show in this sense. And I say, because those two words for me that don't resonate, and I have to explain why, is the word death, because it's eternal life. But I understand when people are talking about the physical body, going back again, energy cannot be created or destroyed. The physical body, which is energy, does go back. It transitions, transforms. Everything transforms. You said January 2015.
Yes.
January 2015 was 6 months after my son transitioned. And that's when I got the inspiration to do this show, to launch the show. It was January 2015. I did my first show March of 2015. But I got the inspiration in the middle of the night. I got up, like I said, I never heard the word podcast. I just Googled, how do you start an internet radio show? And found Blog Talk Radio. My son, when he transitioned July 1st, 2014, I was at complete peace. Now, I say that and people get like, how? The reason why is because 2.5 years before he transitioned, doctors had told me he wasn't going to live, and I tried to take my own life.
Wow.
2.5. So in December of 2011, I was truly blessed with a medical miracle. My son took himself off life support and was completely fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I brought him home, and I came home. I took a bottle of over-the-counter sleeping pills. Don't really know. I never inquired what happened to me physically after that happened. I know I was completely out for 2.5 days. And they had me on suicide watch for 24 hours. But during that time, they allowed me to visit with my son for an hour or so a day. And I remember whispering in his ear. I said, Kyle, get better so we can both go home. That night, he pulled himself off of life support. The doctors were like, oh my God, he's completely fine. It was like he was never even sick.
Wow. So
I made a promise to God. I said, God, I don't know what's going to happen after this. But when I was able to bring my son home that time, December, it was just before New Year's Day, I brought him home. I said, God, I'll never forget this. And I'll never stop thanking you. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Right.
But I'll never stop thanking you. So when my son went back into the hospital in April of 2014, the last 3 months of his life, he was in the hospital, and he transitioned on July 1st. I was completely at peace because I knew 3 things. I knew it was his soul's choice. It was his time. It was nobody leaves here before their time. It was his time. It was his soul's choice. I knew it was a soul agreement he and I had made together. I knew that I'm still here because I have work to do. And I knew he wasn't gone. I knew that I was going to have a reading with the medium, but I didn't know who. And I didn't look. I started this show. I never knew what type of guests. I have expert scientists on the show. I have spiritual people on the show. I had some mediums on the show. I had a medium on the show that gifted me a reading on his birthday. From that reading, it was a Zoom reading. My son literally was trying to talk through the computer. And we literally have his voice on tape from that reading. So I know, and he says he's my co-host. So he's right here now. And he's very proud of what I'm doing. And he says he's my co-host. So I know he's not gone. He's very much, actually, he's closer to me now. You know, I can't physically fuss at him, tell him to clean the room, take out the garbage and all that. But he's still with me. So, and so is your wife. She's still very much with me.
Yeah.
So this show, I'm involved with an organization called Helping Parents Heal. So we have a lot of people that have near-death experiences, and we talk a lot about what, quote unquote, they say afterlife. To me, it's life after life. It's discontinued life. It's eternal and it's forever. This has been so great. And I really do hope to get to meet you in person in 3 weeks when I'm up in Boston. Never been to the Boston area. This would be great. Awesome. Well, thank you so, so much. I so appreciate you being a guest on my show. And I will have all those links that you shared with the listeners. I will have them. What I do for each show, I write up a blog post. So all those links that you mentioned will be in the blog post and also in the video, underneath the video description. Thank you so much.
You're more than welcome. It's a pleasure.
You enjoy some of that sunshine for me.
You don't have to tell me twice.
Okay.
My brain's already on the beach. I'm already there.
Okay. Well, I will definitely I'll hold a picture in front of me.
There you go.
Well, thank you so much because it's snowing.
Oh my goodness. It was wonderful to meet you. I thoroughly enjoy this conversation, and you let me know when it's up so I could share it
I definitely will.
All over my social media as well. And
yes, I'll send you all the links. Thank you. All right.
So sounds good. Namaste.
Have a great vacation. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.